Hello, good morning, students. Hello, good morning, students. Can you hear me?
Good morning,
Good
sir.
morning, sir.
Good morning, Rahul.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Anupriya.
Good morning, sir.
Yeah, good morning, Vaishali. Then Mr. Galande,
Sir.
Shamal. Yeah, all of you are there. Okay, right. So thank you for joining this class. And today we will begin our new unit. And this unit is about poetry. So poetry is here with us once again in this semester. And in our today's class, we'll be talking about a famous poem by uh, Samuel Taylor Coleridge. You might have heard the name of this poet, Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Have you heard his name? S.T. Coleridge. Popularly, he is known as S.T. Coleridge. Samuel Taylor Coleridge is a popular English poet. He is a British poet and he is known as a companion friend of another poet, that is uh, William Wordsworth. Okay. Wordsworth and Coleridge, they were the two friends who wrote poetry, and they are also called as romantic poets. Which poets? Romantic poets, because they set a new trend in writing poetry. They wrote about the elements of nature and the smaller objects of nature, as well as the subjectivity in poetry. So today we'll be talking about the poetry section, and the first poem, that is A part in the second unit, is Love, a poem by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Now let us read the para about the text and then about the author. As usual, you see that we instead of going for the text, we will go for the author first, and then we'll discuss the about the poem section. Okay. So instead of going for about the text section, let us go to the about the author section. And here, author is a poet. Okay. A author who writes or composes a poem is called poet. So this would be read as about the poet. Yeah. Let me know who are interesting people to take initiative in the class to read out the paragraph. This para seems to be little longer, but this is just one para introduction of the great writer S.T. Coleridge. Yes, who is ready? Raise your hands, please. Samuel Taylor Coleridge was a poet, critic, and philosopher of Romanticism. He was the youngest son of the vicar of Ottery, St. Mary, Devon. He was destined for the church. A temperamental, dreamy child, he was sent away after his father's early death to Christ Hospital School, London, where his precious classic reading and powers of inspired talk, which never left him, attracted a circle of young admirers, including Leigh Hunt and future essayist Charles Lamb. At Jesus College, Cambridge, a brilliant career in classics was diverted by the French Revolutionary politics, heavy drinking, and an unhappy love affair, which led Coleridge to enlist in desperation in the 15th Light Dragoons. He died in 1834 and was buried in church. The works of Coleridge are divided into three kinds of poetic. Okay, the critical, sorry, three kinds: the poetic, the critical, and the philosophical. They correspond to the early, then the middle, and the latter periods of poetry. His notable poems are Kubla Khan, Christabel, and the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. These are the works that he has written. Okay, let me check what you are saying. Okay, only good mornings are there. Once the class begins, there's no need of these good mornings. Okay, thank you. See, students, I have read the introduction to the poet, and in this introduction, what we come to know about Samuel Taylor Coleridge is that he was a poet, he was a critic, and he was a philosopher. Poet, critic, philosopher. Poet is a man. Poet is a man who writes poetry. Okay, poet is a man who writes poetry. Then, who is a critic? Critic is a man who gives his own comments about poetry or any work of literature. He is called a critic. And then who is a philosopher? Philosopher is a man who is highly studied and has wisdom, and out of his wisdom, he forecasts about the future of humanity. So this becomes philosophy. And he has his own ideology, his own principles, and such a man of principles is called a philosopher. So Samuel Taylor Coleridge, whom we call as S.T. Coleridge, was a poet, critic, and philosopher of what? Of Romanticism. And by the time you might have heard about Romanticism because you have already studied poems of William Wordsworth. William Wordsworth is called as the exponent of Romanticism in English literature. What do you mean by Romanticism? Romanticism does not mean the way the word you use to describe any movie, that that particular movie is a romantic movie. So here in this context, the word romanticism slightly differs. Here, romanticism means something that is dealing with thrilling things, but in addition to that, the things that are dealing with subjectivity, that are dealing with nature, simplicity in life, simplicity in language, and having dealt with each and every aspect of the nature. So this is close to nature. Just a minute. So I was talking about romanticism, and as I told you that students, romanticism was a literary movement that was began in 1798. Though roughly it is called that it was the beginning of the 19th century. That means 1800 to 1850. In 1850, Wordsworth died. The main figure behind romanticism was William Wordsworth, and in 1850 he died. So 1800 to 1850 are the 50 years of English literature, which are called as Romanticism. But actually, the movement was began in the year 1798 when Wordsworth and Coleridge, these two friends together, they published a book called Preface to Lyrical Ballads. They published their poems in a book called Lyrical Ballads. Lyrical Ballads and other poems were there in that collection. And this poem, Love, okay, by Samuel Taylor Coleridge, was also included in the lyrical ballads. Okay, so this was the beginning. In 1798, they published that book, and in 1800, they wrote a preface to that book. Okay, usually you see that preface is written the same time when you write a book, but in case of this book, it made a history because it was published in 1798, and in 1800, the poets, the two authors of the book, they wrote a preface, and it made a history. Why? Because it was considered as manifesto of romanticism in English, because it was justification why they wrote poetry on trivial things, why they wrote poetry on nature, why they use simple language, common everyday day-to-day language, language spoken by the shepherds of Cumberland. This all was explained by Wordsworth and Coleridge. Particularly, the preface was written by Wordsworth, and he explained what is poetry, and he said that all poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings recollected in tranquility. So Wordsworth gave there the definition of poetry. Romantic poetry is expressive poetry. It is subjective poetry. Every poem talks about the poet's own feelings and emotions. So this is a romantic characteristic feature of romantic poetry. So Wordsworth gives a definition of poetry, then he gives the nature of poetry, then he talks about the function of poetry, then he says who is a poet, then he talks uh, about the language of poetry, that is poetic diction, and all that includes as the manifestation of romanticism in English literature. Okay, in this way we have understood that earlier people used to write poetry about people, important events, incidents, particularly the courtly poetry. Okay, but these poets, the romantic poets, they wrote poems on bridge, they wrote poems on chimney sweeper, they wrote poems on the smaller objects like the flowers, the birds, and rivers. Okay, nature. They wrote poetry about the simpler things. Then they wrote poetry about in the language of the common people. uh, he said in his poetic diction, theory of poetic diction, Wordsworth said that the language of poetry should be the language spoken by the people of the Cumberland. Okay, these are also called as the lake poets because they were residing in the lake district of England. So that language which was spoken by the villagers or common people in that lake district is found in the poetry of Wordsworth and Coleridge. So Coleridge was an intimate friend. But all of you, you know that it is not in your hand what you have to be. Though you have, you can have control on your life, but the situation outside many times uh, uh, defeats you and you lose your control over your life. And this is the story with our poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge. He was born as a child to the vicar. Vicar means priest. Okay, he was born as in the family of the priests. That is what it was, a religious and pious family, and he was born in church and he was brought up in church. But after his father's death, he was sent to the Christ Hospital School, London, and there he learned lessons in classic reading, and he had good oratory also. He had magical gift of speaking. So he had learned art of public speaking, as well as he was I mean a well-read person. So he gathered always a circle of friends around him. He was always popular among his friends, and we know that he was friend of Leigh Hunt and then Charles Lamb. These are also famous personalities of that time. Some of the important people living in the romantic period in England are like this. As already I told you that that time there was William Wordsworth, then we had S.T. Coleridge, then we have John Keats, then we have P.B. Shelley, and these two, Leigh Hunt and Charles Lamb, were also there. Later on, he went to Cambridge, Jesus College, Cambridge. Okay, there also he had a brilliant career. But you know, that time there was French Revolution also taking place, and this French Revolution influenced this person. Okay, whom uh, both William Wordsworth and S.T. Coleridge. And French Revolution was about liberty, fraternity, and equality. French Revolution was about giving right to expression, and that is why Romanticism is highly influenced by the French Revolution and the ideas of the revolutionary leaders like Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Okay, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and there. He was not, I mean, influenced by the French Revolution, but again, he had an addiction, so heavy drinking, and then the third thing, an unhappy love affair. These all took his brilliant career into doomsday, and he was dragged to doom, and he was doomed. He died in 1834. Actually, we had so many expectations from him. He could have done so many things to the service of English literature, but unfortunately, two important things. We can understand that he had leaned towards the French Revolution, and that time it was a welcome move because French Revolution and its ideology supported humanism. But later on, as he was addicted to drinking and to some extent opium also, so he lost his control over himself, and also he had a tragic affair, and he could not get his love also in his life. So in the frustration, he lost his life, and he was died in the year 1834, and was buried in the church. The man who was born in the church was also buried in the church because he was from the family of the priests. Though he we had a lot of expectations from him, he could not meet the expectations of the people from him, but still he has written some brilliant poems, and we what we have left with us is really a treasury. Some of his poems are complete, some of them are half complete, as he was addict and he used to go in the stance. Okay, and in stance he used to write poetry. And we have Kubla Khan. Okay, Kubla Khan in Xanadu did build a palace. Okay, so this was the beginning of the poem Kubla Khan. Kubla Khan is the subtitle of the poem is Dream Vision. Dream Vision. So he was in a dream, and he got a vision, and in that dream vision whatever he saw is about Kubla Khan. So that poem is a dream vision. Then we have another beautiful poem, Christabel, wherein he is talking about supernatural elements. See, if Wordsworth was a naturalistic romantic poet, a poet who wrote about nature, uh, Coleridge was a romantic poet who went beyond nature and he wrote about supernatural elements. Even in the poem Kubla Khan also there are certain supernatural elements beyond nature. Okay, then in Christabel also there are elements beyond nature, that is supernatural elements, something that happens beyond our imagination. Okay, and the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner is also a supernatural poem, wherein we have famous lines: water, water everywhere, not a single drop to drink. Water, water everywhere, not a single drop to drink. Where can you find this situation? It is in the ocean. In the ocean, this ancient mariner, the word mariner is also indicative. The ancient mariner is there, and he was there in the ocean, and his ship was wrecked, and he was thirsty. He was in want of drinking water, but he could not get any drop of drinking water. So he says, water, water everywhere, not a drop to drink. And there is a mystic bird called albatross, which represents the supernatural elements in the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner by A.S.T. Coleridge. अशा पद्धतीने विद्यार्थी मित्रांनो आपण पाहतोय की आपण आज पोएट्री सेक्शनला सुरुवात केलेली आहे. आणि पोएट्री ही कशी असते तर तुम्हाला सगळ्यांना माहिती आहे, ती इमॅजिनेटिव्ह असते, कल्पना लढवलेली असते. तुम्हाला सगळ्यांना जर मी सांगितली, चॉईस दिली की तुम्हाला आजच्या तासामध्ये असाइनमेंट म्हणून एक निबंध किंवा कविता लिहायची, तर मला वाटतं की तुमच्यापैकी भरपूर जण म्हणतील सर निबंधापेक्षा कविता लिहितो, कारण थोडक्यात लिहायची असते आणि मनाने काही लिहिलं तरी चालतंय. निबंधामध्ये काहीतरी माहिती लिहावी लागते, निबंध थोडा तरी खरा असावा लागतो. पण कवितेचं तसं काही नसतं. म्हणून कविता ही काल्पनिक असते. कवितेमध्ये कवी आपली कल्पनाशक्ती वापरत असतो. त्याचसोबत त्याने जर तसं ज्ञान वापरलं तर त्याची कविता आणखी प्रभावी होत असते. आपण कवितेला सुरुवात करण्याच्या पूर्वी आपण हा कवी कोण होता हे जाणून घेण्याचा प्रयत्न करत आहोत. आणि आपण पाहतो आहोत की सॅम्युअल टेलर कोलरिज नावाचा जो कवी आहे, तर तो कवी आहे, समीक्षक आहे आणि तत्ववेत्ता आहे. हा रोमॅन्टिक काळातला आहे. त्या रोमॅन्टिक काळाला दुसरं नाव आहे स्वच्छंदवादी युग असं म्हणतो आपण. इंग्रजी साहित्यामध्ये साधारणतः 1800 ते 1850च्या 50 वर्षामध्ये, अर्धदशकामध्ये, 19व्या शतकाच्या पहिल्या अर्धदशकामध्ये, सॉरी अर्धशतकामध्ये जी काही एक साहित्या संदर्भातली चळवळ होती तिचं नाव होतं रोमॅन्टिसिझम. या चळवळीचा मुख्य प्रवर्तक होता विलियम वर्ड्सवर्थ नावाचा कवी. त्याचा मित्र, जिवलग मित्र होता सॅम्युअल टेलर कोलरिज. ह्या दोघांनी 1798 मध्ये एक कविता संग्रह काढला होता. दोघांच्या अर्ध्या अर्ध्या कविता करून एक कविता संग्रह काढला होता. त्याचं नाव होतं लिरिकल बॅलड्स अँड अदर पोएम्स. आणि त्या कविता संग्रहामध्येच आपल्या अभ्यासाला लावलेली लव नावाची कविता सुद्धा होती. आणि अशा या कविता संग्रहामध्ये दोघांनी एकत्रित लिहिलेल्या कविता संग्रहातली ही कविता आहे. आणि ती कविता संग्रह 1798 ला लिहिला गेला त्यांनी. आणि सगळ्यांना माहिती आहे की कोणत्याही संग्रहाची किंवा पुस्तकाची प्रस्तावना पुस्तकासोबत लिहिली जाते. परंतु या पुस्तकाच्या संदर्भात मात्र वेगळीच गोष्ट घडलेली आहे आणि त्यांनी एक इतिहास केला. या पुस्तकाची प्रस्तावना त्यांनी 1798 मध्ये नाही लिहिली तर 1800 मध्ये लिहिली. त्याचं कारण असं होतं की या पुस्तकातल्या लिरिकल बॅलड्स नावाच्या पुस्तकातल्या कविता ह्या परंपरेला छेद देणार होत्या. त्या बंडखोर होत्या. त्या आधीच्या कवींनी केलेल्या कवितेसारख्या नव्हत्या. आधीच्या कवींनी महत्त्वाच्या लोकांवर, राजवाड्यांवर, राजघराण्याशी संबंधित लोकांवर, दरबारावर अशा गंभीर स्वरूपाच्या कविता लिहिल्या होत्या. आणि ज्या कवितांचा हेतू हा कोणाला तरी काहीतरी शिकवणं होता, शहाणपणाच्या गोष्टी सांगणं होता किंवा नीतिमत्तेचे पाठ शिकवणं होता किंवा कोणाला तरी खुश करणे होता. परंतु या कविता वेगळ्या होत्या. याच्यातली कवितेची भाषा, त्याच्यातले यमक, छंद जे काही असेल ना, आधीच्या वेळेस जी कवितेची भाषा होती ह्याच्या आधीच्या काळातली त्याला निओ क्लासिकल पिरियड असं म्हणतात इंग्लिश लिटरेचर मधला. कोणता? निओ क्लासिकल. अभिजात साहित्य जे म्हणतो ना आपण. तर अभिजात तर नाही, पण अभिजातची नक्कल निओ क्लासिकल म्हणून, सुडो क्लासिकल म्हणून इंग्लिशमध्ये होती. आणि त्या काळातला कवी होता अलेक्झांडर पोप नावाचा महत्वाचा कवी होता. त्यांनी अलेक्झांडर पोपच्या विरोधातल्या कविता लिहिल्या. म्हणजे त्याच्या विरोधात म्हणजे त्याच्यावर टीका करणाऱ्या नाही लिहिल्या. पण तो जशा कविता लिहित होता त्याला बाजूला सोडून दिलं आणि ह्यांनी साध्या सुध्या कविता लिहिल्या. सामान्य माणसाच्या भाषेतल्या कविता लिहिल्या. मग लोक ह्याच्यावर टीका करायला लागले आधीचे कवी लोक. आणि म्हणून त्या टीकेला उत्तर देण्यासाठी ह्यांनी एक प्रस्तावना लिहिली 1800 मध्ये. आणि त्या प्रस्तावनेमध्ये सविस्तर त्यांनी सांगितलं कविता कशाला म्हणतात, कवितेची भाषा काय असली पाहिजे, कवितेचं प्रयोजन काय असलं पाहिजे, कवी कोणाला म्हणतात आणि कवी कोणत्या भाषेत लिहितो आणि असं का लिहितो. तर त्याने सांगितलं कविता म्हणजे कवीच्या मनामध्ये आलेल्या उत्स्फूर्त भावनांचा उद्रेक आहे. कविता म्हणजे कवी इतर लोकांना, एक माणूस, कवी सुद्धा एक माणूसच आहे आणि तो इतर माणसांशी संवाद साधत आहे. कविता डायलॉगच्या स्वरूपात आहे. त्यांनी सांगितलं कवी हा माणूस असेल आणि इतर माणसांना बोलत असेल तर तो त्याच माणसाच्या भाषेत बोलला पाहिजे. म्हणून आपल्या भागामधले एक प्रसिद्ध कवी आहेत, तुम्ही नाव ऐकलं असेल मराठीतले, इंद्रजित भालेराव नावाचे. आणि त्यांनी एक कविता लिहिली. काय म्हणतात त्यांच्या कवितेमध्ये, माझ्या कवितेला यावा सेना मातीचा दरवळ, तिने जपावी काट्याकुट्यात हिरवळ. जर समजा कवी हा सामान्य माणूस असेल आणि तो सामान्य माणसाला बोलत असेल तर त्याने काय केलं पाहिजे, सामान्य माणसाच्या भाषेत कविता लिहिली पाहिजे. हेच लॉजिक म्हणजे इंग्रजी साहित्यातलं आपल्या भागातले परभणीचे कवी इंद्रजित भालेरावांनी त्यांच्या कवितेत वापरलेलं आहे. तर अशा पद्धतीने रोमॅन्टिक कविता पुढे आली आणि म्हणून मग तिथून पुढे कवितेमध्ये एक नवीन ट्रेंड आला. आणि त्या ट्रेंडमध्ये त्याला बरोबरीने खांद्याला खांदा लावून साथ देणारा तसा मित्र होता वर्ड्सवर्थचा, तो म्हणजे सॅम्युएल टेलर कोलरिज. आता प्रत्येकाचा इतिहास सारखा नसतो. आपल्या सगळ्यांची आयुष्य वेगवेगळी आहेत. आता आपण 75 जण या मीटिंगमध्ये आहोत. आपण सगळेजण जरी एकाच भागातले असलो, आपण एकाच कॉलेजमध्ये भेटत असलो, तरी सुद्धा आपल्या प्रत्येकाच्या आयुष्यामध्ये कमी चढ-उतार असतात. तसं हा माणूस एका धर्मगुरूच्या कुटुंबात जन्मलेला, म्हणजे चर्चमध्ये ह्याचा जन्म झाला. लहानाचा मोठा झाला. वडील लवकर वारले. त्याच्यामुळे तो पुढे क्राइस्टच्या हॉस्पिटल स्कूलमध्ये शिकायला गेला लंडनला. त्याच्यानंतर लंडनवरून पुढे तो कुठे गेला, केम्ब्रिज कॉलेजमध्ये गेला. खूप चांगलं क्लासिकल साहित्य वाचायला भेटलं. खूप मोठं लिटरेचर त्याने वाचलं. अगाध ज्ञान झालं. त्याच्यासोबत त्याच्याकडं वक्तृत्व सुद्धा आलं. तुम्हाला सगळ्यांना माहिती आहे, की वाचता सगळ्यांना येतं, पण बोलता सगळ्यांनाच येत नाही. म्हणजे बोलतात सगळेच जण, पण प्रभावीपणे बोलणं, इतरांवर छाप पाडण्यासारखं बोलणं, आपण बोलत राहावं आणि लोकांनी ऐकत राहावं किंवा समोरच्याने बोलत राहावं असं आपल्याला वाटतं. असं बोलणारे किती लोक असतात? फार थोडके लोक असतात. फक्त जसं सहस्त्रेसु असं म्हणतात. तर असा एक प्रभावी वक्तृत्व शैली असलेला कवी सॅम्युएल टेलर कोलरिज होता. आणि साहजिकच चांगलं बोलणाऱ्याला, आपल्याला माहिती आहे की गोड बोलणाऱ्याचे किंवा चांगलं बोलणाऱ्याच्या कोणतीही वस्तू विकते. त्याचं मार्केटिंग स्किल चांगलं असतं. तर त्याचे खूप चांगले मित्र असतात खूप सारे. तर त्याचे आणखी 2 मित्र इथे आपल्या ओळख सांगितलेली आहे. ते म्हणजे ले हंट आणि दुसरा चार्ल्स लॅम्ब. ले हंट आणि चार्ल्स लॅम्ब या दोघांची मैत्री पण खूप प्रसिद्ध आहे. या दोघांनी काय केलं, एस.टी. कोलरिजचे ते खूप मोठे फॅन होते, मित्र होते. आणि पुढे चालत असताना ह्याचं खूप खूप चांगलं करिअर चाललेलं होतं. परंतु त्या काळामध्ये फ्रेंच राजक्रांती झाली. तुम्ही इतिहासामध्ये वाचलं असेल मित्रांनो, जीन जॅक्स रुसोच्या विचारांनी प्रभावित होऊन लोक स्वातंत्र्य, समता, बंधुता हे विचार घेऊन पुढे जात होते. आणि जी फ्रेंच राजक्रांती झाली होती, त्या फ्रेंच राजक्रांतीमध्ये हा कवी ओढल्या गेला आणि तिथे वैचारिक धुरा सांभाळण्याचं काम वर्ड्सवर्थ आणि कोलरिजनी केलं. कोलरिज त्या प्रवाहात गेला आणि त्याची कविता फिलॉसॉफिकल व्हायला लागली. त्याचसोबत त्याला व्यसनं लागली, तो व्यसनाधीन झाला आणि त्याला प्रेमामध्ये सुद्धा यश आलं नाही. त्याचा प्रेमभंग झाला. म्हणजे त्याला व्यक्तिगत जीवनामध्ये सुखातून तो दुःखात गेला आणि त्याच्याकडनं जे आपल्याला साहित्याच्या क्षेत्रामध्ये खूप मोठं भरीव योगदान देणं अपेक्षित होतं, तर ते भरीव योगदान तो देऊ शकला नाही आणि अनफॉर्च्युनेटली 1834 मध्ये त्याची डेथ झाली. तो जन्मला चर्चमध्येच होता आणि त्याचा दफनविधी सुद्धा चर्चमध्येच झाला. असा हा एक धार्मिक कुटुंबातला कवी जो पुढे खूप मोठा झाला असता. म्हणजे आपल्याकडनं जगाच्या अपेक्षा खूप असतात, तरी सुद्धा त्याने बरंच भरीव कार्य केलेलं आहे. इंग्रजी साहित्यामध्ये त्याचं एक खूप मानाचं स्थान आहे आणि त्याने ज्या काही कविता लिहिलेल्या आहेत, त्यातल्या प्रमुख कविता तुमच्या पुस्तकामध्ये ज्यांचा उल्लेख केलाय, अशा 3 कविता म्हणजे कुबला खान, क्रिस्टाबेल आणि द राईम ऑफ एन्शियंट मरीनर या 3 कविता आहेत. जसं मी तुम्हाला आधी सांगितलं वर्ड्सवर्थ हा निसर्गाबद्दल लिहायचा. तसं कोलरिजचं वैशिष्ट्य असं होतं, की तो निसर्गाच्या पलीकडे जाऊन ज्या गूढ गोष्टी आहेत, त्यांना सुद्धा आपल्या कवितेत आणायचा. म्हणजे नेचर आणि सुपर नॅचरल अशा दोन्ही गोष्टींना एकत्र आणण्याचं काम एस.टी. कोलरिज नावाच्या कवीने केलं. त्याच्या ज्या 3 कविता आहेत, कुबला खान, क्रिस्टाबेल आणि द राईम ऑफ द एन्शियंट मरीनर या तीनही कवितांमध्ये आपल्याला नेचर सोबतच सुपर नॅचरल एलिमेंट सुद्धा पाहायला मिळतात. कुबला खान ही एक ड्रीम व्हिजन आहे. क्रिस्टाबेल मध्ये सुद्धा काय केलेलं आहे तुम्हाला सगळ्यांना माहिती आहे, की पऱ्यांची गोष्ट असते. काही त्यांच्या परीकन्या असतात आणि त्या अनुषंगानं क्रिस्टाबेलमध्ये कोणी कोलरिजने लिहिलेलं आहे आणि राईम ऑफ द एन्शियंट मरीनरमध्ये सुद्धा खूप प्रसिद्ध ओळी आहेत त्याच्या. वॉटर, वॉटर एव्हरीवेअर, नॉट अ ड्रॉप टू ड्रिंक. तो जो खलाशी असतो, तो दर्यावरती असतो, तो समुद्रामध्ये गेलेला असतो आणि तिथे गेल्यावर काय झालंय, तर त्याची अ, वाताहत झालेली आहे. त्याला शाप लागलेला आहे अल्बाट्रॉस नावाच्या एका पक्षाचा आणि मग इथे शाप लागणं वगैरे ह्या गोष्टी काय सांगतात, तर नेचरच्या पलीकडे जाऊन सुपर नॅचरल एलिमेंट सांगतात आणि ब्लॅक मॅजिक असेल किंवा कोणाची तरी कर्स असेल, ओके. किंवा तुम्हाला माहिती आहे आपल्याकडच्या मराठी कथांमध्ये विजांचा कडकडाट होतो आणि तिथे काय होती आकाशवाणी वगैरे होते ना. तर हे सगळे काय सुपर नॅचरल एलिमेंट्स आहेत. तर राईम ऑफ द एन्शियंट मरीनर नावाच्या कवितेमध्ये तेच येतात. तो समुद्रात असतो, त्याच्या आजूबाजूला सगळीकडे पाणीच पाणी असतं. परंतु त्याला तहान लागलेली आहे आणि त्याची तहान मिटवण्यासाठी त्याला थेंबभर प्यायचं पाणी मिळत नाही. हा खूप मोठा विरोधाभास आहे. अशा पद्धतीचं लिखाण सॅम्युअल टेलर कोलरिज म्हणजे एस.टी. कोलरिज यांनी केलेलं आहे. एस.टी. कोलरिज ची आपण ओळख करून घेतली. आता आपण काय करूयात, या अबाउट द टेक्स्ट म्हणजे अबाउट द पोएम या सेक्शनकडे जाऊया. ठीक आहे? कोणाला काही अडचण आहे?
No, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Komal. So students, I agree with you that the earlier part, the para that I read and explained to you was slightly faint and nobody was, quite confident that whether he or she could read this properly. So there was some kind of hesitance among you, but now this para is pretty clear. I hope that someone of you can read this para. Yes, those who are willing to read this para about the text can raise your hands and then we'll go ahead. Yeah, no one is willing. I know Achal Baraya is always there to take initiative in the class, a proactive student. I'm happy to see Neha Pawar's hand raised. Yes, some more hands, please. Come on. See students, as you participate in the class, don't hesitate. This is only for learning, and when we are learning, we learn by making mistakes. Okay? It is not that everyone is perfect. Even I too make mistake. Even the best teachers in the world, they also learn by making mistakes. So don't worry. Okay? Nobody will laugh at you, and even if someone laughs, it's his personal loss, but yours is the gain. So I request Neha to turn on her mic and begin reading about the text section.
About the text. Love is one of Coleridge's most interesting and beautiful poems. The poem Love is extracted from the tale of the Dark Lady. in which there is an introduction to Genu. In this poem, the poet has created an imaginary beloved Genu. In 1800, Coleridge moved to the Lake District with the Wordsworths. His marriage was increasingly unhappy, and he had fallen distressingly in love with Wordsworth's future sister-in-law, Sarah Hunchin, has accorded in Love and other Asra poems. His use of opium became a crippling addiction. In this poem, the poet has described his unrequited love affair with Genu.
Okay. So students, see, we can here take a pause. No problem. We can break this stanza. Neha, are you speaking? No. Okay. So, see, students, this poem is nothing but Coleridge's interesting poem and beautiful poem. I know when you are asked to write about any poem, the first line you will write is, "This is a most beautiful and famous poem." That would be the first sentence that you would write. Okay. सर एवढं लेक्चर झाल्यावर हा लेक्चर झाल्यावर बोलतो म्हटलं नमस्कार. So this is interesting and beautiful poem. That is no doubt. Then it is extracted from Tale of the Dark Lady. So this is the section of a group of poems by S.T. Coleridge, Tale of the Dark Lady. So the poems about the lady whom he was in love, and uh, in the whole group there is an introduction to a lady called Genevieve. Okay, Genevieve, and so these poems are called as A Tale of Dark Lady, and this poem belongs to that section. So naturally, this would also be talking about love of whom? Love, Coleridge's love for Jenny wife, the Dark Lady. In this poem, poet has created an imaginary beloved called Genevieve. Okay, this is imaginary beloved. This is not real beloved. Okay, this character was not reality in there. Okay, it was just an imaginary character. In 1800, what happened? Coleridge moved to the Lake District, as I told while I was introducing to you that Wordsworth and Coleridge, they lived in the Lake District of England, and that's why they are called as Lake poets also. And what happened? There he came in contact with Sarah Hutchinson. Sarah Hutchinson was the sister-in-law of William Wordsworth. Sister-in-law of William Wordsworth, Sarah Hutchinson. By the time he was not happy in his marriage, he was unhappy in his marriage, and so he had an extra marital affair, isn't it? If a married person is in love with some other lady, then we call it an extramarital affair. So that was the affair of S.T. Coleridge. And then what happened? Then uh, so this is all the stories there in love and the other Asra poems also. Then his use of opium became crippling addiction. Also, while I was introducing you to this writer, I told you that in addition to being moved by the revolutionary thoughts and ideas of French Revolution, he was suffering of addiction and also of the distress in love. He was addicted to drinking as well as he was addicted to opium. He was an opium eater, and so this addiction took him into the visions, dream visions. So he used to go in deep trance, and so he wrote many of his poems in dream. As I also told you about that Kubla Khan, a dream vision. So already a man who was not happy in his married life, familial life, then fallen in love of other lady, and there also he could not get uh, or win the love of the lady and find satisfaction. So there was frustration. He wrote many poems about that also. Uh, uh, and there is nothing wrong in telling you that he wrote a poem called Dejection and Ode. Dejection and Ode. you might have heard the word rejection. Okay, when you face continuously rejection everywhere in your life, what you get is called dejection. And Coleridge wrote a poem called Dejection and Ode. He was being rejected uh, both in his family as well as outside the family. That is what whom you loved. That is Sarah Hutchinson. Okay, then the next part. Who's ready to continue with the next section of this paragraph? Akanksha Dhule, can you read it? I can see Aishwarya Chavan, Akanksha Dhule, Akanksha Sontakke, then Shivani Alse. Yes, anyone? I'm sure of the other person that is in the class is Anupriya Wavle. Anupriya, can you turn on your mic and continue reading this in this poem section? Yes? Okay. You may be having several issues with you. I don't have any issue, so I would continue reading it. In this poem, the poet has described his unrequited love affair with Genevieve. It is a creation of the poet's imagination. Her emotional reactions to the story are very delicate and subtle. The poet succeeds in depicting them minutely and accurately. The poem illustrates many of the best qualities of Coleridge's poetry. The poet's description of natural landscape is outstanding. Some of the words and pictures found in the poem are very vivid and appealing. So this is what about the poem. This poem is describing Genevieve and then his emotions and obviously see students, the word love also represents emotion. It is one of the most important emotions in human life. So this poem is highly emotional, and this is emotional exchange between the two characters, the lover and the beloved. Man is called as lover and the woman is called as beloved. So lover and beloved, they are having an emotional interaction or exchange of uh, emotions. So there are reactions, okay, emotional reactions of the beloved, and they are delicate and subtle. Okay, uh, and then Coleridge here illustrates many of the best qualities of his poetry. What is his poetry? The best qualities, as I said, that lyricism, rhyme, rhythm, simplicity, day-to-day words, okay, casual words, and still making them very powerful. So these are some of the peculiarities of words. Sorry, Coleridge's poetry, and Coleridge uses those characteristic features in this poem also. The words and pictures are vivid and appealing. Whatever we read, when we read the poem, we are able to create the scene, and we get the pictures that are unforgettable. So, this is the quality of poetry of S.T. Coleridge. आपण आज बघतोय की सॅम्युअल टेलर कोलरिच यांची लव्ह नावाची ही कविता आहे. तर त्या कवितेच्या शीर्षक मध्ये जसं आपल्याला माहिती आहे की प्रेम हा शब्द वापरलाय, आणि तो मानवी भावना ज्या काही आहेत त्यातली एक प्रमुख भावना आहे प्रेम भावना, आणि तिच्याविषयी आहे. टेल ऑफ द डार्क लेडी नावाचा जो कवितांचा एक ग्रुप आहे एस टी कोलरिजच्या, त्या ग्रुप मधली ही कविता आहे. आणि त्या ग्रुप मधल्या सगळ्या कविता त्यांनी आपली एक काल्पनिक प्रेयसी जेनेवाईव नावाची पात्र तयार केलेलं आहे. तिच्याविषयीच्या या सगळ्या कविता आहेत. या कवितांमध्ये कवीने ते काल्पनिक पात्र तयार केले. आपल्या सगळ्यांना माहिती आहे की 1800च्या आसपास, तुम्हाला मी म्हणालो 1798 मध्ये वर्ड्सवर्थनी आणि कोलरिजनी काय केलं होतं, एक कविता संग्रह एकत्रित काढला होता. त्याचं नाव होतं लिरिकल बॅलड्स म्हणून आणि अदर पोएम्स. तर तिथे आपला मित्र जो कोलरिज हा आपला मित्र वर्ड्सवर्थ कडे लेक डिस्ट्रिक्ट मध्ये गेला होता, आणि तिथे गेल्यावर ज्याला की आधीच आपल्या वैवाहिक जीवनामध्ये काही सुख नव्हतं, कोणाला, एस टी कोलरिजला. आणि या वैवाहिक जीवनातलं वैफल्य पहिलंच सोबत आहे, आणि दुसरं त्याची भेट झाली वर्ड्सवर्थ, त्याचा जो खूप जवळचा मित्र होता त्याच्या सालीसोबत, म्हणजे त्याच्या मेहुणी सोबत भेट झाली. त्याच्या वर्ड्सवर्थच्या मिसेसची जी बहीण होती तिच्यासोबत, तिचं नाव होतं सारा हचिन्सन. आणि मग हचिन्सनच्या तो प्रेमात पडला, सारा हचिन्सनच्या प्रेमात पडला आणि तिच्या अनुषंगानं जे काही त्याने साहित्य लिहिलेलं आहे तर तेच आहे टेल ऑफ द डार्क लेडी नावाचा कवितांचा त्याचा समूह. त्यातली एक कविता आहे ही लव्ह नावाची पोयम. त्याच्या आणखीन काही पोएम्स आहेत, त्याला आसरा पोएम्स म्हणून सुद्धा ओळखलं जातं. ह्या सुद्धा टेल ऑफ द डार्क लेडी नावाच्या ग्रुपमध्येच मोडल्या जातात. या सोबतच आपण एक बघितलं की कोलरिजचं काय झालेलं आहे. कोलरिज हा फ्रेंच राजक्रांतीने प्रभावित झाला होता. दुसरी गोष्ट काय झाली होती तर त्याच्या आयुष्यामध्ये व्यसनाधीनता आली होती. त्याला अफूचं व्यसन लागलं होतं आणि तो खूप काय करायचा, नशेमध्ये व्यस्त असायचा. आणि तिसरी गोष्ट, त्याला घरामध्ये कौटुंबिक सुख मिळत नव्हतं. तितक्यात तो प्रेमात पडला आणि त्या प्रेमात सुद्धा काय झालं असेल तर ते बघितलंय आपण, तिथे सुद्धा त्याला वैफल्य आलंय. परंतु त्या प्रेमासंदर्भातली ही कविता आहे लव्ह नावाची. प्रियकर आणि प्रेयसी दोघांच्या एकमेकांसोबतच्या ओतप्रेत भावना आणि त्यांनी दिलेला साध प्रतिसाद यांचं उत्तम शब्दचित्र त्यांनी या कवितेत रेखाटलं. त्याचसोबत आजूबाजूचा जो निसर्ग आहे त्या निसर्गाचंही चित्रण त्यांनी या कवितेत केलेलं आहे. त्यामुळे ही कविता लक्षणीय ठरते. व सॅम्युअल टेलर कोलरिजच्या कवितांची जी काही महत्वाची वैशिष्ट्ये आहेत ती सगळी वैशिष्ट्ये आपल्याला या कवितेत पाहायला मिळतात. ओके, आता आपल्याजवळ थोडाच वेळ शिल्लक राहिलेला आहे, 2 मिनिटांचा. मला असं वाटतं की 2 मिनिटांमध्ये आचलने काय करावं, थोडक्यात अबाउट द पोएट आणि अबाउट द पोएम हे सेक्शन्स जे काही तिने नोट्स डाऊन केले असतील, राईट डाऊन केले असतील तर त्या तुमच्या सगळ्यांसाठी एक नमुना म्हणून सादर करावा. आर यू रेडी बेटा? Okay, please begin.
About the poet. Samuel Taylor Coleridge was poet, critic, and philosopher of Romanticism. He has his own ideologies. He was destined for death, but after his father's death, he was sent to Christ Hospital School in London. He learned classical reading and powers of inspired talk. He was popular amongst his friends. Then he went to Jesus College in Cambridge, where he was highly influenced with French Revolution and had addiction to drinking and an unhappy love affair, which led him to enlist in desperation in the 15 White Dragons. In frustration, he lost his life in 1834 and was buried people. But he wrote very great poems. His notable poems are Kubla Khan, Christabel, and the Rime of Ancient Mariner. Love, about the poem. Love is one of the S.T. Coleridge's interesting and beautiful poems. It is extracted from Tale of the Dark Lady, an introduction to Genevieve. It is an imaginary character. He was unhappy in his marriage and had an extramarital affair. That is, he had fallen in love with Wordsworth's sister-in-law. He wrote many of his poems in dreams. This poem is describing Genevieve and his emotional exchange between lover and beloved. When we read the poem, we are able to create the scene which are unforgettable.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Achal, for the brief, precise, and brilliant summing up of the today's lecture. So, dear students, if you have any doubts, be free and frank and express your doubts and curiosities. I would try my level best to satisfy you. If you want to chat something in chat box, you can use the chat box to raise your doubts. I hope you have understood both the sections about the poet and about the poem section. With this today, let us take leave of each other. Thank you for joining the class. Don't forget to join our class tomorrow morning also. So see you again tomorrow morning. Till then, keep on reading poems and literature. That's all. Thank you. Goodbye.